Hello everyone, my name is Plínio Marco de Toni. I'm a psychology professor at the Midwestern State University in Brazil and the head of the Psychology of Bilinguismo lab. And today we're going to see the lateral view of the cerebrum. I chose to write here cerebrum instead of brain, which is way more common when people talk about the lateral view, because I want to highlight that there is one part of the brain that is called cerebrum, which is this part here. So that would be the cerebrum. Because other than the cerebrum, the brain is also composed by the cerebellum, that is here in the back, and the brainstem, that is this part here, divided in midbrain here on the top, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And other than that, so that would be the brain. So other than that, for us to compose the whole central nervous system, we also need the spinal cord. That is this structure here. So what I'm going to show today is the lateral view of the cerebrum. So this part here. So we're going to see this part in details. And this part is composed by sulci, a lot of different sulci, and gyri, a lot of gyri. So here, for example, we have the central sulcus. Here we have the lateral sulcus. Right here we have the Parietal-Occipital sulcus. And here we have the Preoccipital notch. These structures here we already saw in the previous video, so I'm not gonna get into details here. But they are the boundaries between the lobes. So right here we have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and here in the back, so if we draw an imaginary line here, we have the occipital lobe. So what we're going to do today is actually see the other sulci and the other gyri that is part of the lateral view of the cerebrum. So I'm going to draw everything first, and then we're going to name everything. So here we have one sulcus, another one here in the back, two more sulci here, one sulcus here in the back, in the parietal lobe, and two more sulci here in the temporal lobe. And for us to finish this drawing, because actually it's very simple, we have two gyri. That is actually part of the parietal lobe. And here we have the whole drawing. So what we're going to do now, we are going to name all these structures. So I'm going to start with the sulci, and then we move on to the gyri. And other than that, what we're going to see in this video is a couple of different functions, around 5 functions actually, related to different parts of the lateral view of the cerebrum. Okay, so let's jump straight in. I'm going to start with the main ones, the ones that are actually the boundaries, just for us to remember. So here, I'm going to just put a number 1. So that would be this sulcus. This sulcus here, so this one here, 1. Here, this whole sulcus is going to be 2. This one here, 3. And down here, 4. So I'm going to start here. 1. That would be the central sulcus. Central sulcus. This one here, 2, is the lateral sulcus. I'm going to just make an S here, so sulcus, lateral sulcus. This one here, that is the sulcus that divides the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe, is the parietal occipital sulcus. And this one down here is not a sulcus, it's a notch, because it's actually just a little cut. it's the Preoccipital notch, because it's right before the occipital lobe, so preoccipital notch. Okay, so those are the main boundaries between the lobes. And now we are going to analyze the sulci in each one of the lobes. So let's start here with the frontal lobe. So in the frontal lobe, we have, let's make here 5, so that would be 5, 6, and 7. So this one here, and this one here. Here 6, here 7. So 5, 6, 7. This one here, it's right before the central sulcus, so it's the precentral sulcus. This one here, it's the superior, and this one is the inferior. So superior frontal, because it's in the frontal lobe, frontal sulcus, and the inferior frontal sulcus. Okay, so that would be the sulci in the frontal lobe. Down here we have exactly the same idea in the temporal lobe. So we have, let's say, number 8, it's this one here, and 9, this one here. So 8 and 9 would be superior, inferior. So superior temporal lobe, temporal sulcus, and the inferior temporal sulcus. Inferior temporal sulcus. Here in the parietal lobe, we have a different situation because, of course, like we don't have superior and inferior because we just have one in the middle. So we have one sulcus here, that's gonna be 10, and this one here in the middle, 11. So 10 would be number 1, central sulcus. After the central sulcus, so in the posterior part of the cerebrum, so post, so that would be the postcentral sulcus, postcentral sulcus. And this one here that is on the surface of the parietal lobe, but there is just one, it's called intraparietal sulcus. Intraparietal sulcus. Intraparietal sulcus. Okay. So that's it. So those are the sulci of the lateral view of the brain. All right. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna get another drawing, exactly the same thing, but just for us to name the gyri. So, okay, so that would be the central sulcus, the lateral sulcus, the parietal-occipital sulcus, and the preoccipital notch. So here we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe here in the back. So instead of drawing the sulci, we already did, we are gonna draw, we are gonna name the gyri. So that's gonna be we are gonna start with the frontal lobe here. So that's gonna be 1. So this gyrus here, 1, 2, everything here, 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's the frontal lobe. 1, it's the gyrus that comes right before the central sulcus. So it's the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus. These three here are called superior, medium, and inferior frontal gyrus. So 2, superior frontal gyrus, just an G here, gyrus. This one here in the middle, medium frontal gyrus, and this one here, inferior frontal gyrus. Inferior frontal gyrus. So that would be the frontal lobe. Down here we have the same thing, the temporal lobe. So we have 5, 6, and 7. 5, 6, 7. 5 would be superior, medium, inferior. Exactly the same. So superior temporal gyrus, medium temporal gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus. Superior temporal gyrus, medium temporal gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus. So the names here are exactly the same. Here, of course, like we have a different situation because, as I said before, we don't have two sulci here, but we have just one here in the middle. So this gyrus here, it's gonna be 8 in the parietal lobe. It's called postcentral gyrus. And here we have a situation that it's the only part of the cerebrum that we have this kind of situation. Here, instead of having just one gyrus, we actually have a lot of different gyrus here and down here. That has no name. Most of them has no name. So instead of calling everything here a gyrus, because that wouldn't make any sense, because actually this part is composed by a lot of gyri. In here we have a lot of gyri as well. We call this part here a lobule. So this part here is going to be 9, everything, and down here 10. So 9, 10. 9 is the superior parietal lobule, like this. Lobule means like a little lobe, lobule. And then inferior parietal lobule. Inferior parietal lobule. And just for us to finish the description of the gyri, we have other two. So we have this one here and this one here. Other two gyri. So that's going to be 11 here. This structure here in the middle. And here 12 here. Inside this little line that I drew. So 11 would be the supramarginal gyrus, supramarginal gyrus, and this one here, that is actually very important for one of the functions that we're going to talk about in a little while. It's called angular gyrus. Angular gyrus. Okay, and with that we have the description of the whole cerebrum in its lateral view. So the lateral view of the cerebrum. Of course, like we can analyze the cerebrum also considering other two views. And we're going to end up doing that in other videos. So we can, we can analyze the inferior view of the cerebrum and the medium view of the cerebrum. We're going to do that later. But just for us to finish this video class, I want to show you guys a couple of different functions. Of course, like the brain doesn't work that simple, but it's just like a beginning for us to analyze a couple of functions and try to relate these functions to different parts of the brain. So here, right here in the frontal lobe, in this structure here, we have a very important area that is called Broca's area, that is related to language. And here in the temporal lobe, and these two structures here are actually way more common in the left hemisphere. For most people, not everybody, there are some people that has these two structures in the right hemisphere, other people in both hemispheres, but for most people in the left hemisphere. We have the Broca's area here and the Wernicke's area here. So I'm gonna just put a letter A and B. A and B. So A, it's gonna be the Broca's area that is related to speech production. So especially the motor aspect of speech. So speech, Broca's area. And B would be the Wernicke's area. The Wernicke's area. That is more related to language comprehension. So language comprehension. So the understanding of language. Not the auditory sensation. So what happens is that there is another area here that is responsible for hearing. And if you damage this area, you will go deaf. So that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is that there is an area of the brain, the Wernicke's area, that is responsible for understanding language. So pretty much transforming the sounds that you hear into verbal phonemes and understand that all these sounds as language. So that's one of the main functions of the Wernicke's area. So, for example, if you damage this area, you are going to develop something that we call Wernicke's aphasia. Aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, or Broca's aphasia, related to speech production. But the Wernicke's aphasia would be more related to the fact that you can't understand what you hear. You're not deaf. You can hear everything, but you can't understand that as language anymore. So that would be the main function of the Wernicke's area. Other than that, we can say that right here in the angular gyrus, here we have another very important function. So I'm going to just put a letter C here. So that would be the angular gyrus. That is related to spatial orientation. 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 Spatial orientation, or the perception of the space. And of course, like, it's not just this area that is responsible for that, but the angular gyrus plays a very important role when it comes to the perception of the space, or spatial orientation. And just for us to finish this video, I just want to highlight two other areas, that is the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. The precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus, that are related to the representation of the body, but in two different ways. Here in the frontal lobe, more related to the motor representation of the body, and here related to the sensory representation of the body. And these two areas here are called, so I'm gonna just put a letter D and E. D and E. So D, that would be the Penfield's homunculus, Penfield homunculus, but D would be the motor Penfield's homunculus, and E would be the sensory Penfield's homunculus. Sensory Penfield's homunculus, which means that if we can move our body, because we have this area here, the motor Penfield's homunculus. And this area actually works as a map of the body, a motor map of the body. And which is very interesting here is that each part of the body has a different size in this map. So for example, if we take our hands, and especially the thumb, we can see that we have a huge area in this map that is responsible for moving our finger, especially the thumb. That is actually way better, for example, than the area here that is responsible for moving our back. Because of course, like, if we take evolution, the hands developed an importance way higher than, for example, your back. So we need actually more neurons in order to control the hands, especially the fingers, especially the thumb. That's why we have more neurons in the cortex to control this part of the body. And it happens exactly the same when it comes to the sensory Penfield's homunculus. So we have more neurons in order to feel, like, the tactile sensation of the hands, not just the hands, but also your mouth, your lips, for example, than other parts of the body, such as, for example, your legs or your arms. Okay, guys, so I think that's it. And if you guys have any question regarding the lateral view of the cerebrum, so the sulci and the gyri, also these functions that we just saw here, please let me know. Thank you so much.